So good to have you here with us. Thank you for joining us for what I'm sure is just one of the many conversations that we'll have in this studio and certainly around the Federation on this important topic of cannabis. The plant known by many names to include ganja, reefer, sensi or sensimilia if you want to be more sophisticated, weed, wisdom herb, and the list goes on. What is certainly evident is that the plant, which was once vilified, has once again found itself at the frontier of science and research. Terms like CBD and THC are now household names, but they are really just two of the dozens of compounds that are found in the cannabis plant that interact with probably the largest receptor system in our body. Yet it wasn't discovered until 1988, when the discovery of the endocannabinoid system was made. Meanwhile, a multi-billion-dollar industry is already marketing cannabis in all its flavors to consumers around the world, and the Caribbean is slowly beginning to play catch up. As governments across our region begin to clear the legislative and legal hurdle to allow for greater exploitation of the myriad opportunities that exist with this plant, it is so important that we are all armed with accurate and reliable information so that we can make informed and educated judgment about its use and also its risks. The role of the St. Kitts and Nevis Medical and Dental Association, the SKNMDA, has always been and will always be to educate and engage you, our valued listening audience. We are also grateful for the partnership with the team here at ZIZ who generously support our mission and make conversations like this one possible. So let's dive in. The topic tonight, speaking bluntly, all pun intended. Cannabis, the medicine, the fad, the psychedelic. If I have my slides now, that would be great. Yes. The history of marijuana and the history always favors the person who writes it. So do not knock me for where I pulled my history from. I'm sure there are some history that might differ slightly. Either way, I guess what I'm trying to say is that cannabis dates back to as far back as we can go back in time, as far back as 2800 BCE, and appears to have had its origin somewhere in Central Asia or Western China. And the first documented use was Emperor Shen Nong's, who was named as the father of Chinese medicine. It was found in one of his books. The timeline goes back to Hindus, and in fact, one of the Hindu gods, Shiva, received the title of the Lord of Bang because of the cannabis was his favorite food. In 129 to 200 AD, Galen used cannabis for its therapeutic properties and mood enhancement. And we can date forward 1841 when O'Shaughnessy introduced cannabis to Western medicine after having lived in India, where he witnessed cannabis used for what is referred to as refractory convulsions in a child. In 1936, a film, The Reefer Madness, came on, and the demonizing of cannabis as a highly addictive drug started to be marketed as something that caused mental disorder and violence. And by 1937, the marijuana tax was introduced in the United States. The plant is a member of the Cannabaceae family. Over 400 molecules known so far, a combination, almost 100 of them are cannabinoids, which will speak mostly of THC and CBD, terpenoids, flavonoids, omegas 3 and 6, and fatty acids. I'm sure some of you at home must be wondering, why hasn't this been one of the sources of your omega 3 and 6? But we'll get into that. The endocannabinoid system, which is something that we'll touch on a lot this evening, and I had the privilege of doing some research at NYU on the endocannabinoid system when we were looking at use of cannabis for refractory or for epilepsy or convulsions that would not respond to treatment. Back in the day in 2012 when I did that research, there were over 400 receptors found in this system, and it was determined the largest receptor system responsible for so many functions, particularly homeostatic functions. And for those of you who don't understand the term homeostasis, what I'm referring to is simply that everything that regulates the internal sort of mechanism and dynamics of the human body, the endocannabinoid system, to some extent, from turning up the heat, fever, regulating temperature, alertness, hunger, sleep, so many. At some point, at the crux of this, at the center of this, is the function of the endocannabinoid system. Folks, I won't bore you with this when I have such a panel of, I think, the most interesting group of individuals I could pull together to discuss a topic like this. So big is the panel that you will see some changes throughout the night. But without any further ado, I wanted to recognize the individuals who have the privilege of joining me here in the studio. We have Dr. Joy Woodley, President of the Medical and Dental Association here in St. Kitts, and my co-host this evening. If she didn't know that, she's just read the memo. We have right next to her Dr. Garfield Alexander, the CEO of the St. Kitts and Nevis Cannabis Authority. And I'm not sure whether this face has made it to HealthWise in the past, but I certainly found a way to twist his arm enough to get in here. Dr. Dwayne Archibald, well known to the St. Kitts community, the manager of the Accident and Emergency Room at GNF Hospital. I'm going to, pitch right to my good friend Garfield here, because I think, certainly he sits at the helm of what I believe to be an important but also historic initiative in this country. I think many of us are, those of us who perhaps lacking information like myself, would like to get some background on the Cannabis Authority. And I was corrected today when I sort of used the same commission interchangeably, and I was corrected by Dr. Alexander quite quickly that it wasn't the commission, it was the authority. I'm not sure which one has more clout, but certainly we're about to find out. Garfield, tell us a bit about the background of the Cannabis Authority and your role as CEO.
Okay, good night, first of all. Thanks so much for having me. Again, I just want to piggyback off some of the words you used tonight. I think this is indeed a historic moment. We're having this dialogue with the president of the St. Kitts and Nevis Medical and Dental Association, the manager of A&E, and our esteemed Dr. Pierre, who seems to be able to fit anywhere and just provide synergy. But we are having this discussion now on a national level, and even after legislature has already been passed. So it's not even an exercise of just educating the public, it's an exercise of really getting some feedback and really having a dialogue amongst colleagues as well, which again is landmark. The Medicinal Cannabis Authority primary role is to develop policies and procedures, guidelines to establish the medicinal cannabis industry, and to ensure that medicinal cannabis is available to patients in a safe and efficient manner. I'm going to just run back over that again. The Medicinal Cannabis Authority primary role is to develop policies, procedures, guidelines to establish the medicinal cannabis industry, and to ensure the medicinal cannabis is available to patients in a safe and efficient manner. The proposed vision statement of the Medicinal Cannabis Authority, or the St. Kitts Nevis Medicinal Cannabis Authority, is to have a medical, therapeutic, and scientific cannabis industry that creates equal opportunities, enables people's health and wellness with safe and diverse products, fosters investors' confidence, and strengthens the economy of St. Kitts and Nevis through an effective regulatory framework. Proposed mission statement: to regulate the medicinal cannabis industry in St. Kitts and Nevis in the public interest so as to ensure that compliance with the law, support best practices in the research, cultivation, manufacture, management, governance, and administration of medicinal cannabis. So really my role is to foster the growth of the medicinal cannabis industry, make sure it's properly regulated from seed to sale, and ensure compliance, whether local and international. But again, it kind of broadens for me because there's certain hallmark infrastructures that need to be in place. Like we have to at least know exactly where we're going.
Yeah.
The fact that cannabis is an agricultural product, we have to restabilize and kind of add to the infrastructure of agriculture as well, because cannabis cannot sit on its own.
Yeah. Fair point. Thank you for that. I certainly, it's exciting and as a medical doctor, I'm sure, which all of us are. But Dr. Archibald Dwayne, I think you for the last several years, and you've been in the ER business for quite some time, I can imagine that you've seen the other side of this proposed industry, where now we're talking about when you walk into the emergency room, there may be a very good chance that we may be providing this as a prescription of some sort or treating you to some extent, but I'm sure that you have had the experience of treating patients who have come into the emergency room. And I guess for me, what I'm thinking of is, because I think this is where it is the two worlds and how we find, and I think we have an important role to sort of clear what is very muddy waters now in understanding why this is important from the therapeutic standpoint, but why there are some risks that I think that we should be concerned about. How big a concern is that from the standpoint of what you see in terms of decompensation of chronic illnesses like asthma? How big a role does marijuana use play? Marijuana intoxication vis-a-vis other intoxications that you may see in the emergency room, and also accidents. Is there some concern right now where you sit in that regard based on historical context?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Pierre. As we said before, marijuana, you see the uses in the medicine and recreational. And as Dr. Alexander mentioned, that not the committee, the authority putting down some safety guidelines for the use. So basically what we see in the emergency room tend to be the overuse, the abuse of it, the abuse in what people deem the medicine. As I've seen kids coming in with treatment for asthma from what people deem marijuana tea. Maybe it's the potency of the marijuana tea sometimes give the not desired effects that we tend to see, the stuporous state, the almost not conscious state. Sometimes we have persons coming that have been vomiting for days because of the smoking of the marijuana. I mean, in my research we have deemed that the cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, which apparently is quite frequent. I've seen it a number of times. So what mainly concern is the overuse, the abuse of it. Some of the beverages, notice some beverages are popular with the main ingredient being the marijuana, especially the fatty-based ones, the milk-based ones, that people tend to overuse sometimes. And that is a concern, as you said.
Right.
Me personally have not seen any accidents caused by the use of marijuana, the deranged cognitive state of persons. But I could imagine that someday would lead to that. Therefore, I do agree with Dr. Alexander in terms of putting in some form of security and some form of guidelines in the use. Just like alcohol was once ago, used moderately, not abused. Let's do that for marijuana as well.
Right. But I think for me, it's one of the most interesting pieces of work or bodies of work that exists out there today is Sanjay Gupta's, who is a neurosurgeon, also a CNN correspondent, did some brilliant work on cannabis. And I think some salient points from his article was, one, an apology from him saying that, he really anticipated that individuals who weighed in on cannabis before had the correct information and recognizes how many hands were at play. One of the things that he said was very surprising to him was how marijuana pales in comparison in terms of addictiveness to other recreational drugs. So I know there are people sitting out there right now tonight and looking at you in the emergency rooms from that standpoint and saying, well, yes, we're speaking from the medicinal standpoint here, but we also have had together with this the decriminalization of marijuana, which means that we can begin to see an uptick in the use. And I'm not sure how that authority regulates the personal use that may happen in the household. Right, so I think for me what I'm trying to understand is, because I think what people don't understand a lot of times is that comparison. The one-off case of the individual who passed went to the emergency room. At least my experience, most individuals get treated in the emergency room and then they're discharged them, as opposed to other toxicities where they need to be admitted, or sometimes in the ICU, for example. At least from my experience, a marijuana intoxication does not amount or equate in any way to a cocaine intoxication. Do you believe that you will begin to see an uptick or abuse of the drug per se. I mean, I know you speak of the fact that individuals perhaps don't use the right quantities, the right portions, and that's what I'm going to pitch Dr. Woodley after you, because I want to understand, what do we need to be doing in terms of the education now that you don't need to take as much as you can get because you're not sure when you'll get again. You know that it's decriminalized and there's proper usage of the plant. What concerns do you have from the standpoint of this versus alcoholic intoxication and the other recreational intoxication that you see in the emergency room? Do you expect an uptick in those?
So first I have to ask, what do you call proper usage? Because how can we know, how can we quantify the amount of marijuana that one intakes in a beverage, in the tea, or even in what they call a blunt or a joint, if I'm using the terminology correctly.
Right.
So, yes, initially, with the decriminalization of marijuana, we do expect to see many persons come into the emergency room with some form of intoxication. However, gradually, as education gets out there, education is the key. We expect to see a decline. Persons understand what the effects are and how to avoid certain effects and what not to do.
Right.
So as to come to the emergency room, but just to, if they're using it as a recreational drug, or even if they're using it as accidentally overdose for medicinal purposes.
So Dr. Woodley, I have allowed this conversation to sort of mushroom out a little bit because I can very well imagine you're sitting on the other end and you're appreciating the fact that the Medical and Dental Association has a key role to play in terms of how our members, because I think we're instrumental in educating our patients. I think we're also instrumental in educating our colleagues around marijuana use, its therapeutic benefits, its adverse effects, as we would any other drug in pharmacology. What, if any, is the role of the Medical and Dental Association in that education drive that needs to take place?
Okay, good night, and thank you for having me. I'm normally in the other chair.
Yes.
And it's a bit strange being on this end and not hosting. I was told I'm co-hosting.
Oh, you are hosting though.
Okay, great. As it relates to the marijuana medical industry, and Dr. Alexander, he said something that actually opened my eyes. He said, medicinal cannabis industry. I thought I would have heard the recreational part of it, but it just seems as if what we are establishing here, I don't know if I'm wrong, is just the medicinal part. And persons need to underscore that and take that in. I was very much impressed about a week or two ago when the ministers in the House of Assembly, they spoke about, the bill about establishing this industry. I must say they tried, and in my opinion, they achieved bringing a more or less balanced discussion about the industry, and surprisingly, most of them aren't doctors. As it relates to us doctors, we have to be honest. We went to medical school, and at this point in our lives, we were not taught about cannabis, marijuana, weed, joint, whatever, at school. So it is something actually new to us as well, and I am not going to pretend that we have whole wealth of knowledge on this as well. So as we educate, which is the platform on which the SKNMDA performs, we are also educating ourselves. We have to remember, though, from basic psychology, from basic pharmacology, that this drug is a psychoactive drug. We are going to introduce it into our society, and we have to introduce it with great responsibility. It's another drug that has potential use of abuse and dependency. So all of our policies, all of the legislation has to be geared around that. Education, as I said, is of paramount importance. We would have to go and have discussions like this, and I really want to thank Dr. Pierre for initiating as well this dialogue, because we need it among our doctors. We were not taught in school how to use it. We were not taught how to prescribe it. Today, I even learned, in fact, my patients are actually educating me about the drug. I do my own research here and there, but my patients, they give me the hands-on experience. For today, for example, I learned you have Fondo, which is the green tobacco mixed with marijuana, as opposed to brown, which is the processed tobacco mixed with marijuana. So education is out there, but at this point in time, we don't know what is the correct or how correct our education, our material is out there. So as the SKNMDA, our job is, firstly, educate our doctors, because we need to be educated on that. So I would believe that Dr. Alexander, in his quest to getting this industry established, he would link closely with us. From there, then we will be able to disseminate the information that he gives us. What I can tell you though, Dr. Pierre, and you and Dr. Archibald spoke about it, and what I don't want us to do is to sanitize, sterilize the use of marijuana. When we take away the name marijuana and how it is used in our society, it is used mostly through smoking. And most times when you smoke, no matter what it is you smoke, you have adverse effects. The marijuana plant, it is potent. I think it's a plant that should be put in a glass box and be looked at, because it has so many properties, so many things we don't know about, that before we start introducing it, we really have to learn about it. You spoke about side effects, and it's not as bad as others. I am telling you, it is as bad. I work in the operating room, and many of our patients who come through who are smokers of marijuana, we have problems. I am not saying that you cannot do or cannot use the plant, but as Dr. Archibald said, what is the amount? What is the stipulated amount? That we don't have as yet. Patients who come through, because I'm a surgeon, I have to operate, I work with anesthesia. In order to get those persons to sleep and keep them under, they have to get sometimes 3 times as much of the anesthetic drug to keep them under. So what does that mean? It takes them longer to wake up. When they are up, and the persons who use cannabis, they go through the same symptoms like any addictive drug. They get withdrawal symptoms. So sometimes, Dr. Pierre, sometimes the withdrawal symptoms are so bad, we have to take them to the ICU so that they can be monitored closely. So what I'm saying here, our discussion has to be balanced, and we have to be blunt, as you said, about our discussions, because we are in the infancy stages where we are trying to get it right. When we are trying to get things right, we have to be totally honest and give both sides of the coin. As time goes by and we have it right, we have proper legislation, then we can pull here and we can pull there. But in these initial stages, we need to give the good, we need to give the bad. So my question to Dr. Alexander, the industry is solely about medicinal cannabis and not recreational cannabis. So I just wanted to clarify that for me.
Okay.
No, by all means, go right ahead. I think.
What we have to understand is that there was a landmark judgment a few years ago done, well, in the case of Ras Sankofa Maccabee. And within that judgment, that cleared us constitutionally as adults to choose whether we want to engage and how we want to use cannabis, especially within the privacy of our home. So in terms of what we term recreational, these are just, I like to say, euphemisms. It's a way how we communicate to make the topic more approachable to persons, especially in the public. But really, they have different meanings for different persons. Recreational only means that it's outside of medicinal, but even when you're infusing, smoking, drinking, eating cannabis, even recreationally, it actually is impacting you, or can impact you spiritually and medicinally. So really, there's no separation. There's a separation in terms of legality. For example, right now, every clinician above the age of 18 can choose to use cannabis within the privacy of the home and even cultivate it within the privacy of their own home. That's stipulated by law. after the case with the Sankofa Maccabee. So in terms of recreational, the law doesn't have to come in again, or I don't have to have an industry or run an industry around recreational cannabis.
But Dr. Alexander, the thing is, recreational and medicinal, in my opinion, they are two different things. Because recreational, you don't have any illness and you just want to get the high.
Right. No.
Or
I'm saying there's medicinal where there's a proposed diagnosis and this is a treatment for it, and that has structures within it. I'm saying that outside of that, however I want to interact, if I choose, all right, I'm home and I'm going to do a cream and I want to apply it to myself, that's medicinal in my mind, and that's medicinal by any other means.
so then you have left it up now to the interpretation of the individuals to use it. So that is where legislation has to be specific.
No,
but would it be fair?
Hold on, Pierre. It's not about specificity per se. I'm saying that what we're doing in terms of the legislature is bringing cannabis within the realm of legality, just like alcohol and tobacco, where you as an adult, you're allowed to make that choice on your own. The same as alcohol, we talk every day about people abusing the alcohol, but we can't legislate and go and take a bottle from somebody. We could decide children can't be given this, alcohol could only be sold in these areas, you need a license, we regulate it. The same applies for cannabis, but at the end of it all, it's the person's individual and constitutional right, how they want to interact with it. Where we come in is on the medicinal level, that if your Dr. Woodley decide, I have this product, I need to come and show, you have to come and show the authority that you have done your research, that this product, this cannabis product that you have is actually medicinal, what is the diagnosis that it can be prescribed for, and those structures need to be in place for a diagnosis and for you to prescribe. That is what my office governs. But outside of that, there's a constitutional right that every adult citizen has to interact with the plant as they see fit. Because again, let's keep calm, it's a plant. So we really don't need to do it. Well, not that we really need to do it. It's no longer within the realm of our choice to dictate how an adult, whether Rastafarian, whether bald head, or whatever the case may be, how he decides individually how he wants to interact with the plant. Once it's in the confines of his home.
So, Dr. Alexander, sorry, Dr. Pierre. What I'm going to get him from Dr. Woodley basically is that there's this gray area. Yes, you're controlling the medicinal part, but what about how, what stipulates a person to say, hey, let me go out and get 20 beverages that's infused with marijuana?
What stipulates somebody from going out and getting 20 beverages with sugar, even though they're diabetic? So what I'm saying is that
that's a person's conscience.
Good. So the same applies for cannabis. Why do we think that it's different when it comes to this specific plant? But then we allow persons who are diabetics, if they decide tomorrow to drink Coke, all we could do is advise.
But remember, alcohol started the same place.
No, so we are agreeing that alcohol is in that place. We are saying that every adult has that individual right to sustain himself and make decisions for himself, whether even if we don't agree or not.
So then having the legislation doesn't make sense.
I want to bring it back to the center. One second, I want to bring it back to the center, because the reality is that I think we're doing a disservice to the plant. I think marijuana it's too far complex to oversimplify as if it was one single plant. There are different species. There's indica versus sativa. There are ways to manage and to actually vary the levels of THC, which is a psychoactive component in marijuana. So all marijuana wasn't created equal. So to speak as if it's a singular plant that wherever you take it is going to have the same effect, I think does a disservice to the plant in itself. And we're talking about a plant that has the capacity to impact over the largest receptor system in the human body, which means that it can have myriad and multitude of effects. So I think we have to, I think part of the education process and part of what we'll see coming out of this industry. I remember being in New York in 2012, 2014, and then flying over to the West Coast and landing in Seattle and then entering a store with marijuana, and I was given like a menu. It wasn't just a plant. I was given a menu based on what I wanted to treat, whether it's my mood, whether I wanted to be calm, whether I wanted to be, and I had varying levels of THC. I could tell how much THC versus CBD, and it was curated. So it became, so that's where the industry is, which takes me now to this, because in last year, the marijuana industry was some $16 billion. $16 billion with a projected growth rate of 25% per year. And I guess my question is, I tell them, which I lament a lot, because I grew up, for those of you who don't know, I grew up in a marijuana culture. My dad, my uncles, there isn't a single person in my family that I don't know who is Rastafarian and grew up in that culture. My father is no longer Rastafarian, but I'm sure he wouldn't admit it, but I'm sure he probably smoke a little blunt every so often. It's hard to get away from something that I believe is so ingrained in our culture. But I guess, Dr. Alexander, I guess my question is, are we not trying to, how do we catch up to the rest of the world? How do we compete? How do we position ourselves? As I know we're Little and Mitalawa, but the reality is that there's a lot of big money. There's a lot of investment. There's a lot of venture capital in that industry right now. How does St. Kitts position itself, and how do we, what is the goal here in terms of how do we create a business that is profitable, but also allows us to do the research that is required to ensure we don't run into problems like what we're very concerned. I'm happy to hear the passion here, because again, we've grown up with weed. It's part of our culture. I don't know anybody here who hasn't smelled weed before in their life, because it's ubiquitous. But I'm so happy to hear that our doctors aren't just taking this wholesale and saying, this is, I think we're all equally concerned, but at the same time we recognize the economic opportunity. My concern is, how do we catch up with the rest of the world that is so far ahead?
Before Dr. Alexander answers, what we need to stay focused on, we cannot think so much on the money and making the money, because that same money we make, we're going to have to build institutions for the persons who are affected, etc. As Dr. Alexander said, there's no rush. We have to study the plant properly. Let us not try to invent the wheel. Let us take researchers from all over the world, and many parts of the world, the big countries, they're actually locking down and tightening their rules on this cannabis use because of the side effects and the potential of its abuse. So I know we are looking towards the economic part, but we have to slow down that. Once we get it right, and that is what I'm going to lament on, getting it right in terms of educating, letting the public know exactly what this drug does, what this plant does. This plant needs to be admired. I mean, I salute it. But we have to dissect it properly and know what we're doing. And we cannot let the money and the economic benefits be the driving factor for our policies and legislation. We have to slow it down a bit, look at what's happening outside there, and then apply it to our country. It has to be individualized.
Guys, we are going to take a break. We're going to cool off in whatever way we can. And we'll be back. This is great. Stick with us. We'll be right back in a few minutes. We're discussing cannabis, speaking bluntly. Thank you. Ooh, this is great stuff.
It's time that we realize that we must work together to thrive. The world as we know it, the sky and below it. Could I never have more wonder? Yeah, with life and all you see, and the climate's changing, but hope is remaining. And we can't ignore the future. It depends on you and me. One chance, all that we got. One voice, together we stand. Take care, the world where we live. Permite a todos vivir. Tomamos la oportunidad para guardar la humanidad. And I must leave no one behind because we are. One climate, one Caribbean. One climate, one Caribbean.
What did you mean earlier about climate change, Mom? Well, when I was your age, I remember beautiful coral reefs and healthy beaches. The summers weren't as hot as they are right now, and the rainy season meant that it only rained when it was supposed to.
And then what happened?
The weather just started to change, and storms got worse. Coral reefs started to die because the ocean was getting too warm, and crops started to die because there was not much rain. You know, we realized as adults that we were doing something that was causing this.
What were you all doing?
Same thing we're doing now. Not using clean, renewable energy, chopping down too many trees, and even polluting the air with gases, such as the gases emitted from our cars when we drive around.
We need some help before it's too late, Mom. We can't let it get worse. What can I do? We can raise our voices.
With 35 million dreams, aspirations, and futures at risk in CARIFORUM, we need your voice in our story against climate change. Acknowledge, commit, act. This message is brought to you by the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center under the Intra-ACP Global Climate Change Alliance Plus program and is funded by the European Union.
It's time that we realize that we must work together to thrive. The world as we know it, the sky and below it. Could I never have more wonder? Yeah, with life and all you see and the climate's changing, but hope is remaining. And we can't ignore the future. It depends on you and me. One chance, all that we got. One voice, together we stand. Take care, the world where we live. Permite a todos vivir. Tomamos la oportunidad para importar la humanidad. And I must leave no one behind because we are one climate, one Caribbean. One climate, one Caribbean.
Yeah, people die from alcohol, Garfield.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you, I'm going to have to ask the permission of ZIZ to not go back to any breaks because I think we need more time than we have, certainly for this show. But it is so heated, so passionate, but all good. You know, I mean, I brought a group of folks who love each other on and off set, but also are extremely passionate about this for a myriad reasons. Thank you for staying with us. We are discussing marijuana, cannabis, the fad, the psychedelic, and the medicine, which is at the crux of the matter here. We have in studio with us Dr. Dwayne Archibald, who is the manager of the Accident and Emergency Room at JNF Hospital. We also have Dr. Garfield Alexander in the hot seat, thanks to the lovely lady next to him, Dr. Joy. Dr. Alexander is the CEO of the Marijuana Authority here in St. Kitts, and Dr. Joy Woodley, well known to HealthWise. This is mostly her show. I'm just stealing from her for tonight, and she is here as the president of the SKNMDA. Before we went to the break, I was asking Dr. Alexander, how do we catch up? How do we position ourselves? Dr. Woodley feels it's not all about the money. And I agree with her entirely, but certainly if there is an opportunity, not just because there's money to be made, but money to be saved because we have something that is readily available to us to treat some of the very same things that we actually buy very expensive and dare I say medication that is sometimes of dubious quality. And if we can build an industry here that allows us to not only make money, but also to save in terms of the way we treat patients, certainly I think it's worth pursuing. So, Dr. Alexander, tell me, how do we catch up to an industry that seems to have already gone miles ahead of us, now $16 billion in terms of market cap?
So, Gaffy, before you answer, let me compound on something that Pierre mentioned. In 2010, I saw a foreign rugby player in the emergency room. Had severe trauma, multiple fractures all over, but were healed, but he had chronic pain. And one of the medication that he was taking to alleviate the pain was marijuana. I did ask him to quantify how he took it. He said he just went to 2 blunts a day, and that was prescribed by a doctor. Many patients here that have seizures use marijuana-infused drops, marijuana-infused tea, and stuff like that. And I'm speaking from children to adults. Yeah. So basically what Pierre is asking, and I'm not speaking to the financial part of it, I'm speaking to the medicine part. When can we see marijuana-based medicine in the stores, in pharmacy, when we can go in farm care or any other pharmacy and say, hey, okay, we were prescribed that by the doctor. Can we get that?
All right, let me take one question.
Sure, no problem.
Pierre asked me, when do we catch up? One, we have to let go of that mentality that we need to catch up. Okay. I think it's unique. Even the journey of cannabis throughout the history of St. Kitts has been unique. We love to live on comparatives, but there's really no comparative. There's nobody we need to catch up to. I can give you this example. Jamaica has the best brand recognition when it comes to cannabis in the world. Really? It's the only place that has a Bob Marley, that has that has produced the music that combines with this plant and has been able to market this plant. And they're still having issues in terms of medical cannabis industry and medical cannabis and cannabis industry on a whole.
Why is that?
Sorry?
Why is that?
That's, again, because they started out on the right path.
Right.
Where they were about indigenous growing, they were about equity, they were about pushing back some of those social injustices, they were about restorative justice, and then they moved after that path when there was a change in administration. So there was different political will and more of a focus on finance. And once you focus on finance, you're always going to have the persons with the business acumen who are always, by far, going to excel. And then when they excel and when they have money, they're going to apply power and leverage to change the industry in the favor, to benefit them the most. Absolutely. This is happening in Canada, that's happening in Jamaica. So again, what we start out with is a policy that recognizes the injustices that the war on cannabis has created. So really and truly, we can't be looking at others looking at just profit. It can't, our mission and vision cannot be based on profit alone. So that's fundamentally it. In terms of what Dwayne is asking, again, I always get the impression that persons think that we're somehow going to sit down in a room and devise or set up the architecture for this industry. What it's going to be is that we really have to start to revalue. There's going to have to be a paradigm shift in how we view things. It can't be a comparative. This is what happened in Jamaica. This is what happened in Canada. This is what we're going to do. We want to know what is best for us. And to understand what is best for us, a lot of it has to be what the Rastas were doing, because they're the only one that's been marketing this, along with other health pillars, such as eliminate red meat, right, low salt, eat vegan, eat local, sustainable utensils, sustainable pottery. These are the things that we have to go back to. And these are the ones that have been in the vanguard for the past 100 years. So in terms of, at least for me, in my thrust, has been watching the Rastas. And again, I've been relearning agriculture and the whole from these guys about ecosystems, about soil preservation, about organic growing, about how we have to revitalize and refocus on food. Even if we think we're going to have a successful cannabis industry, we still have to think about food because they go hand in hand. And you ask any smoker that and he'll tell you that.
So I hear that, and I appreciate the optimism, but I think wherever there's money, there's corruption of some kind. And my concern is, how do you create a sustainable industry without creating a steady consumer base? And you know, if there are individuals who are prescribing marijuana in a very small country of 55,000 people, I can very well imagine there is going to be an over-prescribing, there's going to be an over-sale of the drug so as to create a sustainable business. So I think And I'm happy you disagree because actually that's the kind of disagreement that actually brings me comfort.
Right.
Because what I've seen in every other industry, they have tried to grow their consumer base because that's what money does. If you're making money, you try to create more of it, and to create more of it means you create more consumers. And if we're saying medicine is the way to commercialize it, then can very well the pharmaceutical industry has held the medical community hostage for a very long time. We're prescribing things and we're over-prescribing, and if you practice in the United States, you know it very well. There's a drug for every single mood, everything that you go through. So I am concerned. I think it's a reasonable concern to be had. But I'm happy to hear that you have something in place and you're looking at this from that perspective in a way that you protect and ensure that big business, that private businesses don't enter this market, and you see a repeat of what has happened in Jamaica. Dr. Joy, I see you burning on the other end, and I have to pitch to you because I want to hear you.
I think we are jumping the gun here. We're talking about the big money, making the big money, how to catch up. I need to hear from Dr. Alexander. How am I'm speaking from the doctor's point of view, how am I supposed to prescribe this drug? I don't know if any infrastructure has been placed down, if you have any ideas how we are going to go about it. I heard you say you would have the Rastafarians who have been the vanguard of this plan for many years advise you. But I would like to get something, I'm a surgeon, I'm very pragmatic, I do things by steps, like a recipe. What are your guidelines? And as I said to you before, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. I know St. Kitts is...
Sorry, I could answer your question before you even finish, because I think I already get it. We have to establish...
Well, we have to make sure our audience who are listening, they get my question.
Good.
So...
In terms of how we go forward in terms of prescribing, that's not an answer Dr. Alexander will give you.
Okay.
Dr. Alexander, the Medical Cannabis Authority, has to sit with the Medical and Dental Association, the Doctors Association,
that's
the
what I need to know.
Mm-hmm. Nothing has been set up. Dr. Alexander is coming with no preconceived notions. We still have to have those focus group discussions and decide how do we prescribe. Okay. What Dr. Alexander is presently working on is making sure that the farmers are mobilized, that we have a growers association going on, that the legislature that was discussed and designed before continues on the pathway of discussion, because again it was interrupted. We had a change of administration, so I'm now looking presently at the consultants that we've had. Most of them have been some of the consultants that established the Jamaica legislation, that established the St. Vincent legislation. They've seen the advice of our commission, the CARICOM commission. So everything here is actually going in a stepwise manner, that we are now consulting with these consultants to move now on the ground and speak with the relevant associations. And we are going to structure it together. It's not a matter that it's structured or we are going to take a template from Canada or a template from Jamaica. We ourselves will sit in rooms and decide how is this going to go.
Okay, well, because I am happy because I didn't even realize I was a part of this. So that is why I'm happy that we are having this dialogue, that we are going to be a part of it, because that has always been my thing with natural medicine, as we call it, is how much to give. Because I can't tell you take 2 leaves and this would cure you. Dr. Archibald said, the gentleman said, he took 2 blunts. Two blunts. And that actually made him feel better. So now, how do I prescribe that and say, okay, well, I'm going to give you 2.5 because you're a little bigger, or I'm going to give you 1.5. So that is the issue I've always had with the natural medicine, and of course, cannabis falls under that. So I'm happy to hear. That is why I'm here. I'm asking questions. I told Dr. Pierre I don't know anything about marijuana. He said, great, that is why you should come, because you're going to learn something tonight. So I'm happy that I'm learning tonight.
That persons see that even doctors of the greatest levels can still have misgivings about cannabis.
Of course.
Misgivings?
Misgiving, nuances, whatever the case may be, because there's nobody that has all the information. And for us to make educated choices, for us to make choices that are going to affect generations to come, they have to be well thought out, they have to be retrospective, and they have to be ready to be linked to action.
But I think you made an important point offline, which I was hoping to have heard while we were online, which is we're not starting from scratch. It's not as if we're inventing this industry. It already exists, and there's a lot of work. There are bodies of work that exist around
and not just bodies of work in the region. We've had bodies of work created here because there were also some committees that were set up under the previous administration that worked vehemently in collecting information and consultating with not just the public but focus groups such as the Rastafarians, such as the Bureau of Standards. All these different groups, focus groups, have already come together and made decisions, and we have all these documents already. So we're not recreating the wheel, and we're certainly not just mirroring the wheel of somebody else. A lot of the information here was gathered from within the confines of St. Kitts.
So, yeah, I was very happy to come across some of that information because I pulled it up myself, and I saw that, for example, a requirement that you'll have two tiers of practitioners. You'll have those who are medical practitioners for prescribable marijuana, what is required in terms from the CME standpoint, continuing medical education for those practitioners, herbalists for non-prescribable marijuana components, that they must meet international labeling standards. So it's not about just packet something like we see happening with, and you know, and this is why for me one of the questions is, how do we then, if we're doing this for something and we're actually adhering to best practices for marijuana, I can't imagine that we're turning a blind eye to nicotine and other smoke that is still in the public domain. I think as a medical community, as medical doctors ourselves, and from the Medical and Dental Association standpoint, we also have to lobby for those things because those things are equally unhealthy as well. So the idea that marijuana should be consumed in a private setting and you can't do it in the open, I think the same should apply across the board for other things that are equally noxious. So those are some of that sort of advocacy I think is important at this point. So you are right that that there's some work done already and we're not starting from scratch. With this, I am going to take a short break because I want to bring on a gentleman who's sitting across from me, and we need to have him here because there's so many questions that Dr. Woodley has that I'm sure that he needs to answer, and I know he needs to give some support to my good friend here, Dr. Archibald, who's in the hot seat. Thank you. We'll be right back. ZIZ, 2 minutes, please. Thank you.
It's time that we realize that we must work together to thrive. The world as we know it, the sky and below it. Could I never have more wonder, yeah, with life and all you see and the climate's changing.
But hope is remaining.
And we can't ignore the future, it depends on you and me. One chance, all that we got. One voice, together we stand. Take care, the world where we live, permite a todos vivir. Tomamos la oportunidad para guardar la humanidad. And I must leave no one behind because we are. One climate, one Caribbean. One climate, one Caribbean.
What did you mean earlier about climate change, Mom?
Well, when I was your age, I remember beautiful coral reefs and healthy beaches. The summers weren't as hot as they are right now, and the rainy season meant that it only rained when it was supposed to.
And then what happened?
The weather just started to change, and storms got worse. Coral reefs started to die because the ocean was getting too warm, and crops started to die because there was not much rain. You know, we realized as adults that we were doing something that was causing this.
What were you all doing?
Same thing we're doing now. Not using clean, renewable energy, chopping down too many trees, and even polluting the air with gases, such as the gases emitted from our cars when we drive around.
We need some help before it's too late, Mom. We can't let it get worse. What can I do? We can raise our voices.
With 35 million dreams, aspirations, and futures at risk in Cari Forum, we need your voice in our story against climate change. Acknowledge, commit, act. This message is brought to you by the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center under the Intra-ACP Global Climate Change Alliance Plus program and is funded by the European Union.
It's time that we realize that we must work together to thrive. The world as we know it, the sky and below it. Could I never have more wonder, yeah, with life and all you see and the climate's changing.
But hope is remaining.
And we can't ignore the future, it depends on you and me. one chance, all that we got. One voice, together we stand. Take care, the world where we live, permite a todos vivir. Tomamos la oportunidad para guardar la humanidad. Andamos leave no one behind because we are one climate, one Caribbean. One climate, one Caribbean.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us, we're discussing cannabis. Speaking bluntly, the psychedelic, the fad, the medicine. And we just switched up things in the studio a little bit because we needed to get as many perspectives as possible, albeit we don't have enough time in one evening to cover such an important and such a vast topic as cannabis. But I want to introduce a gentleman who I had the privilege of knowing just a few days ago, but certainly he comes very highly recommended. Ras Agard, thank you so much for joining us in the studio. I am going to, because we're already running short on time, I'm going to delve straight in. And I think I've left this question to you, which is to walk us, because marijuana has a long history of playing some part in religion as far back as the Assyrians and Egyptians. But I think so much of its centricity today is in the Rastafarian community that we can connect with. How big a part of the Rastafarian community or religion, if you want to call it that, is marijuana? And what is the historical sort of context of that association?
Give thanks. Blessed greetings all. Well, to dive right in, but first let me thank Alexander to defend the marijuana just like a Rastaman. So I must say that. Right, now history, as you know, I mean, you had earlier history talking about the Chinese and different nations using the herb and what's not. But the history, as far as Rasta is concerned, goes straight back to the biblical era. And the biblical era here talking about from the very beginning of the whole era in itself as the genesis of the marijuana. For in the scriptures, for those of you who have Bible, you could actually pull it out now and go through your Genesis, and on the third day, the Almighty say, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit trees. Now this is what the Mosai says. So the Mosai is saying that the grass feed the animal. The herb-bearing seed plants, such as cannabis and others, was supposed to be meat for men, for mankind. He went on to say in another area that the green grass is for the cattle, and the herb-bearing seed plant is for the service of man, the service of man. So you find that from that area of the creation of the plant, it's not Rasta make the plant, we didn't go in a lab to put anything together. It was created, and Father has given that as even the first, one of I think it was the second commandment. He said, I've given you every bearing seed that is upon the earth, and every tree which is for fruit of the tree yielding the seed, and it shall be for you for a meat. Now, cannabis. Canne bossen. Canne is the Hebrew word for cannabis. Just like cinnamon, you have cinnamon, and in the Bible you would have canne bossen, which is now called cannabis, and it was part of the recipe for making the holy anointing oil. All this is in the Bible. For those of you who might want to look it up, if you go to Exodus 30, verse 23, you'll see it in there as sweet calamus. For those of you who have other Bibles, because some people they hate cannabis so much, they start to change up the names even into the biblical scriptures. So you might see it also as sweet cane, right? So here it is that it was part of the anointing oil that Aaron, and this is for the Christian community, who should be here defending the herb, they're the ones who have the book that spoke about it from the very beginning, and yet they become the biggest haters of the plant for some strange reason. It's not really a strange reason. Is conditioning over a period of time, and we wouldn't know based on what went down with Randolph William Horse and making it illegal in America and what's not. But back to Kanye Bussin. Now, Solomon, in the Songs of Solomon, chapter 4, verse 14, there was also the mention of it being in his garden. And then in Ezekiel 27:19, there was also the mention of it being in the marketplace. So we have to realize that cannabis only became illegal in the early 1900s. So that's just like modern. So for the past 7,000 years, if we really hear that long, cannabis has always been legal. When the slaves went to Brazil, they took it with them, and they cultivated it, they smoked it. It was just used as Rasta use it, as we use it today. Now, in America, though, there was some racism with it, because it was said, side talk, the white people would say, well, these black people, when they smoke marijuana, they think they're as good as a white man. So it really pains me sometimes when I hear like black people seem to have a problem with cannabis as some kind of immoral thing in itself. I don't even like to hear it be called a drug, but still, the doctors then would refer to cannabis as a drug. We also hear it was illegal. I don't know how a plant could be illegal. So there's a lot of strange things that we allow to happen in our society as black people. And strange enough, this is Black History Month, so I guess this conversation is right on time with that. But as far as the use of the cannabis and Rasta, it comes straight out of the book. We continue to do it just like how the book have it, as for the service of man, as for your meat, and also as for your sacrament. It's part of your anointing oil. And
so for the Rastafarian, what I'm hearing is that cannabis serves a more religious purpose. So you wouldn't necessarily classify this as recreational, would you? I mean, when you hear the term recreational, does it seem to you like it's a sort of get high, there's no sort of spiritual attachment to this, there's no historical attachment to this herb, but certainly it makes you, there are psychoactive components in there, of course, just like somebody would drink alcohol. Do you consider the use that Rasta has for the herb as recreational, or is it something more deeply spiritual with that?
Rasta generally don't deal with no recreational thing. Alexander uttered good about it, because it's like, while you're using it, whether you're taking it based on a prescription or whether you're using it just based on a feeling, you're still getting medicinal benefits. Right. So there is nothing recreational. This is just a word come up using maybe for outside of that, but we don't believe in no recreational use. We're just using the herb based on scripture say use the herb.
So a lot of the comments, I'm looking at the chat here, and I love the concern, which seems to underscore some of Dr. Woodley's concern, which is the fact that there will be wanton use of this drug. There's no regulation. Kids who lack knowledge will be using, and there are lots of comments in the chat about that. In fact, somebody goes on to say that rum has been certified, it has gone through its percentage stages. Cannabis is different because you're just essentially growing and smoking. Smoke as much as you want to.
You see, I think Earth is one planet. I say that to say this. Rastas has been here just as long as everybody else.
Right.
So the persons who are making these comments and have these concerns, are they not understanding that they live amongst people who are doing this all the time? I asked the doctor earlier, I mean, how many Rasta has been, to the psych ward based on the use of marijuana compared to persons who don't use it? If you look at the global figures, we're talking about marijuana and having concerns. It's just like the COVID issue. I'll just give a small example. When you look at your TV and say 20 persons died from COVID, and you see 20 dead bodies laying down on the ground, you get so scared and, like, wow, there's a lot of people dead. But then when you look at the CDC report and show you that in that same year, 40 million people died from NCDs. All you're hearing is a number. You ain't seeing no dead bodies. Do you realize that them 20 bodies that you saw on the floor seem to be more than 40 million? Just because you saw it? So this is a psychological issue at times. So we don't need to have that kind of fear. Like, oh, if cannabis get free like lemongrass, everybody gonna use it. It's supposed to be free like lemongrass. Look, for instance, people go to the supermarket to buy sweet pepper and seasoned pepper and all these things, and guess what? They could grow them at home.
Pierre, one of the things and again, I've had fears about cannabis. I sat on the Marijuana Commission, the National Marijuana Commission, and we waded through all these arguments before. I'm at the stage now where I think it's a journey of self for persons to go and really re-educate themselves, because the evidence is there. We've had several bodies of scientific bodies. The CMO head the Marijuana Commission, and we all arrived at the conclusion that the laws that we had stipulating how we interact with this plant were egregious and wrong. They also stipulated how we should start out. We had the CARICOM Commission that came with the same findings and gave us the same advice. So for us to be looking at posts and hearing fear, we understand that people are going to be fearful, and people are going to continue to be fearful. The focus cannot be fear. The focus has to be continued medical information, continued interaction, and continued research, so we could start to see where this plant can really help us, not to continue answering the fears of persons. That can't be the focus forever, because continuously, over the past 10 years, we've had scientific bodies established to delve into public interactions, delve into science, look around at the different examples, don't reinvent the wheel, and all have come back. CARICOM, National, there was a committee established by the previous administration to draft the legislation. Everybody came up with the same conclusions. That this is a constitutional right. So when it comes to what we call recreational, that's not even in the realm of how we should scientifically approach this. Everybody has to make that journey on their own. And that we should enter this arrangement or enter in this industry the medical means. Because that's the one with the most structures and the most rigors. And that is what we're going to do in a consultative matter, but with focus groups, not interacting with the public. The public has to make a lot of that journey and the re-education process on their own, and then we leave it in the realm of the education system, where we start to talk to children about early, and interact with them early, and give them science-based knowledge so they could arrive at their opinions scientifically, not guided by fear. Because if you read the comments, a lot of the comments are repeating these same fears from 80 years ago, 100 years ago. We also have one extremely deep base of research already. And again, it's these Rastafarian groups who for nearly for 100 years have been getting pregnant on just vegan diets, smoking even while pregnant. So we have resource for the right there. We just need to set up the institutions where we investigate ourselves and stop using the evidence of other persons in other jurisdictions.
Okay, let me jump in here for a while. First of all, Ras Egad, when we're having these discussions, because you came on and you said, you want to congratulate Dr. Alexander for defending the herb. The rest of us here, probably including myself, we're not here trying to bash the herb. So when we are coming together to speak about this topic, we have to be, a bit more neutral in terms of how we express ourselves, because what we want to do is to get everybody as much as possible on board and trying to understand. We have to remember we are on the eve of something, although it has been in society and has been in Bible times, although it has been for a long time, there are still a lot of misconceptions, there are still a lot of fears. So do not try to box persons into or divide us into groups. We are here defending the herb, we are here trying to understand the herb, we are here trying to see how we can get it incorporated into society and gain all the benefits from the herb. Of course, we cannot forget, as a herb, although it came from the earth, there are some downfalls to it. And that is why we are here, because we are trying to understand those downfalls. We cannot be blind and say, oh, because it comes from the earth, it's good. Cyanide comes from the earth, it's poisonous. Some mushrooms come from the earth, they are poisonous. We have cocaine, which comes from the poppy plant. Cocaine is a Schedule I drug, which, you know, the FDA has side listed. In fact, the FDA has placed marijuana as a Schedule I drug, which means they too are afraid of it. So I think the fears, the questions, we're mincing this apart. I think it is reasonable, and the conversation has to be one of inclusivity and not trying to make other persons feel as if we are bashing, other person feel as if they are bashing the plant. So we have to, and Dr. Alexander, this goes for you and the authority, that when we are, you know, inviting conversations, of course, everybody's going to have their view, etc. But we need to come with the focus that we're trying to get the benefit from the plant, and we need to listen to everybody. Let us not make the mistake that was made with the vaccine and COVID-19. Persons were fearful, and the decisions and the talk and the narrative to those persons' fears were rash, abrasive, and a lot of persons have post-traumatic syndrome from the COVID and the COVID vaccine and its use and the way it was thrown onto us. So let us learn from that, and let us approach this, because trust me, I know the benefits of marijuana too, for chronic pain, anxiety, vomiting, etc., etc. All I want for it is to be regulated in such a way that we do not add to the sack of psychoactive drugs that put people in ICU. We don't add to it. We want to bring in marijuana, and we want to limit as much as possible those side effects, because we have to deal with alcohol, we have to deal with nicotine, cocaine, LSD, ecstasy. We have to deal with those. So now that we are bringing in another one, let's try and bring it in safely as possible, so that we avoid those harsh effects. So we have to be honest, and we have to bring a balanced discussion. So let our talks and narrative reflect that balanced discussion, because once we start to go a certain way, then we're going to exclude a part of society. We're going to exclude the Christian society. I know they know the Bibles, but we still don't understand the plant. The Rastafarians, I kudos to you, because you guys have fought with this plant. I see many persons who smoke it. You, as I told you, Ras Egad, I wouldn't see you up A&E. You know why? Because you know what you're doing. But I see my 18 and 19 and 17-year-olds in A&E because they don't know how to do this. So it would be good if you come out here and tell us how to roll a blunt, may you know how much to put in. I mean, either get stressed out, I don't know, if you could teach me how to do it. But that is why we are here. So I do not want the narrative be of such where we start to exclude people because we have our own dogmas, our own prejudices, our own preferences. We are having an open discussion. We want everybody in. Let us not repeat what happened, and I'm going to say it here, let us not repeat what happened. And Dr. Alexander, you were vehement about it during vaccine. Let's bring everybody in. Bring in all of the stupid questions, as we sometimes say, bring in all of the fears. Just bring them and let us discuss it.
So, John, I think that's a very good. That's actually a very good segue into the next part of our conversation. And this is why having individuals of different mindset, different approaches, different experiences with marijuana is so important. And you're right that it has to be an all of society approach. I think we have to have something that, and you're right, I think ever so often things are imposed on people and forced on individuals. And while marijuana has been part of our culture, certainly if it's going to become widely available, if it's decriminalized, I think all of us who live within the society, not only as medical doctors, if we have teenage sons and daughters, we should be concerned that they too at some point may be exposed. And it's a reasonable concern to be had. And I think that's what raises some of the questions that I see in the chat, and I get bombarded with a lot of them, which is, one, do you as a Rastafarian feel that popular culture, to some extent, is doing a disservice to something that you have such a more deeply spiritual connection with? And is popular culture responsible for some of the misnomers, some of the misconceptions around marijuana use? For example, in St. Lucia, they call it a black joint. I saw the name Fanta in here. I'm not sure
Yeah,
what that
Fanta,
is.
that's the one.
I'm not sure what the name. So maybe you can enlighten me what Fanta is. Called a black joint. I'm not sure where you mix it with something else, and the potency is significantly well beyond what you get from just THC on its own. And there's also the question of quantity. How much reasonably should a person consume of the weed, and how do you know how much of it you're consuming in any given period?
Well, I'm not here to make that determination for anyone. In the sense of use, I wouldn't even tell anyone to use marijuana.
Okay.
I'm just here to defend the herb through the spiritual means, to show that this plant was created for us to use. We have the ancestors who used it, the oral traditions and so on that has been passed down from slavery to us. We continue that. We know that the whole idea of making cannabis illegal was racist, and also in some areas economic wars. And then for some time you start seeing, because again in replying a little bit to what Ms. Woodley said, because when doctors speak, right, and when doctors show fear and concern, the people listen. People listen, and people also develop that concern, that fear from what the doctor speak. I'm so happy to be between y'all here, all of your doctors, and I'm just not a doctor. So you find that what I say will not resonate with the persons who listen more to what the doctor say when it comes to anything medical. So I'm not here to discuss medical or anything like that. I'm just here to discuss it, that this thing comes straight out of the Bible, and we have a majority of Christian-minded people in the Caribbean, and all they have to do is just open the book and realize that this thing is not supposed to be illegal, and if they try to understand why was it illegal, they'll realize that part of it was racism, and for black people to be against a plant that was made illegal by, white people, so to speak. These are the things that we could actually look at. So you find, and the reason, I just want to respond to Dr. Woodley a little bit there. Sure. The reason, as I said, I thank Garfield. Listen what I said carefully. He defended the weed like a Rasta man, right? So I had to say that because the conversation that y'all had earlier, remember I was there listening, and the way that he delivered the whole response was well done. I mean, it was excellent. So I was just thanking him for that. I mean, I could thank you for the questions that you asked too, because the questions that you asked and the concerns that you shared, also it would be, you have a lot of persons out there with the same concerns you have, with the same fears that you have. So it's really good that you ask those questions. So forgive me for not saying thanks to you for your questions as I did for Garfield defending the hope.
That's Agad. And Garfield, this is for Dr. Alexander too, eh? So Dr. Alexander has to be as neutral as possible when it comes to this. And because if he then is seen as a defender of, the herb like a Rasta, then we're going to cut out certain persons who want to join the conversation too. Because we have to admit, this is how society is. I'm not saying that we have to always bend and go according to society, but remember, we are trying to get as many persons in. So all discussions, all those who defend, all those who go against it, all those who are in the middle, we all have to have them here. So when we start, especially when the authority start taking a particular slant, then we are in trouble.
Pierre, Joy, I want Joy to understand that my position is not a political position. It's not even a popularity contest.
Right.
And I am Rasta to the bone. Yeah. And what I bring to this role ain't just what the job description is. It also brings my life experience and all that I've been through before. And I want people to understand that that I don't want us to speak as if there wasn't a consultative process, or if education was in. Again, I'm going to go back, not just to the Bible, not in the only book. I'm going back to the files that we did a marijuana commission that went across both islands, St. Kitts and Nevis, talking to education, the police, legal fraternity, business minds, and arrived at certain conclusions.
Excluding the St. Kitts and Medical Dental Association, because we didn't get that. So that is why I guess I am here.
Joy, I was a representative of the Medical and Dental Association. I was the president at the time. So I represented the Medical and Dental Association on the commission.
Yeah, no, actually, Gaff is correct that he was president. One of the things that
did this trickle down to our members?
No, but Joy, it's not about trickle down to my members. I'm saying that we are speaking as if that we need to do a consultative. We've done the consultative process, island-wide for the commission. We did it again.
But Dr. Alexander, I am here and I'm saying to you, well, let me just say from me, I did not get
no, but it's not a matter.
So that is why we are here trying to figure it out.
No, so I'm saying, even if you figuring it out or you not figuring it out, doesn't mean that it didn't happen.
But it didn't happen to me.
Good. But I'm saying it happened. So the decisions that were made for this legislature was not based on a few politicians getting in the room or a few groups. It was done across several years, several groups, several different persons on several different levels.
So,
so the legislature we have now is not Dr. Alexander worked on it, or the previous administration worked on it. It's an ongoing process where persons have passed the baton and several different groups, several different commissions have added to the value of that.
So Garfield, it's to that. I wanted, and we should be wrapping up soon, so we're getting more closing remarks.
So, hold on, I just wanted to, so a lot of those fears that I'm hearing now are also the same fears that we met when we're doing those consultations across the island. And those are things that are now drafted into the consultation.
But I will defend, wait one second, I will defend the association here, because that's why I was brought here, Al. That we were not, I have to put it out there, we were not, so I guess that is why we as doctors, we have the fears still.
The Garfield is saying that at the time he was serving as, I actually went for the commission report, and he was the president of the Medical Dental Association. There was a hiatus when nothing happened. I'm not sure what happened that caused this hiatus. But it raises the question now, how much of that, because one of the things, for example, I saw here to the question of quantity, it spoke of 15 grams of cannabis. I'm not sure what was the basis for that amount. It spoke of 5 plants, for example, in that you were allowed to have. The question is how much of that report is now passed on and is now being used for that new cannabis legislation, or some of this here has been omitted.
Again, this is a process that's ongoing. As I answered Joy's question earlier when I said that we still have to meet with the St. Kitts and Nevis Medical and Dental Association again before most of these laws are ratified.
Okay, fair enough.
So nothing is going to happen without Joy being involved, without you being involved.
Not me, the association.
The association. But I listen, this is precisely why, I want to speak to the fact that this is such a complex topic. It's such nuanced that it simply cannot be reduced to a simplistic conversation of good or bad, or I think there's so much here to actually tackle, right? From the religious perspective, you've done a great job at doing that. The relationship of the Rastafarian community. It certainly cannot be that Rasta was built so different to the rest of society that you're able to enjoy the benefits of this herb, and then somebody else, for some reason or the other, all they enjoy or they experience are the adverse effects. So I think there has to be that middle ground that we can find, and it will take us a while to get there. There's so much we have to unlearn. There's so much we have to actually go and educate ourselves and re-educate ourselves about. The good thing about it is that, and I know that this is new to St. Kitts and Nevis, but it is not new in terms of the research has always existed. There's so much research out there about marijuana. A lot of it was hidden for all sorts of untoward motives, but the reality is that the research is out there in terms of what THC is, and we cannot speak of marijuana as if it was one singular plant. There are so many different species of the plant. There are ways in which people are now actually calibrating the amount of THC, CBD in a plant. I have prescribed CBD to individuals who have anxiety, right? Not the THC component, but certainly CBD oils and so on for individuals with anxiety and other mental health conditions, and they have come back to me and said that it's worked. So this is extremely important. I think we're in the right place. I hear the passion. I hear all the passions for the right reason, my brother. I hear you here, and I know that you come from a completely different perspective. which is going to be very healthy conversation for us. I think we need to bring individuals like you in to the Medical and Dental Association. I think the CEO here needs to embrace the Rastafarian community, not just from the Growers Association perspective, but from the educational and the re-education exercise that needs to take place. Your closing remarks. I want to go to my very impassioned Dr. Woodley on the other end over there, who still seems a little unsettled, but I know that we're heading in the right direction. I like the unsettledness, because that means that she's going to be advocating for Dr. Alexander to make a showing at the journal membership, right? So, Joy, any last words from you?
Okay, so I want to thank you for bringing me on. I really enjoyed this. It was so organic. Nothing was planned. Everything just flowed. It actually showed us how we as doctors, how we interact with each other. No love lost at all. I mean, Garfield is my brother. Agard is not my new brother. But I really love it. And what I must say is that when something scares you, when something makes you a little anxious, it means that it's something big, something good. And as a surgeon, I like to get a little scared, because I tend to be very careful, cross my T's, dot my I's. So whenever I get that fear, that anxiety, I don't let it go. And that is why I was like this tonight, because this is something that we have to treat with uttermost respect, with caution. I know this would not be our first dialogue on this topic, because we have so much to learn. But I would caution everyone out there, please do your research as well, read up, whatever fears you have, look it up. And I must thank Dr. Alexander for being part of the authority. And I know any doubts that I would have, any questions, I would always reach out to him. So on that note, have a safe week, be kind, love one another.
Dr. Alexander, I'm going to pitch to you. My brother, you are in the hot seat, but I know that if there's one person who has the shoulders to bear the weight of that office, it's you. You know, as you rightly said, this is so much of your past, so much of who you are is tied to this. This is not just a job for you. I think it's a vocation. I think I may be right in saying that. Parting words from you. What should every person who's listening to this tonight, what should they go back home to their family? What should that conversation be like? I think you placed a lot of the onus on personal responsibility. What are your parting words to our listening audience tonight?
Well, I could feel the fear, and the thing is that I was at that point where I felt that fear as well too, especially sitting on the commission, because Joy alluded to it. We go through med school and we really don't receive any real education about the cannabis plant, at least not in this realm, not even as a medicinal, not even from a medicinal realm are we educated fundamentally on it. So being on the Marijuana Commission allowed me to really dive deep into it and see it as a social vehicle as well. So a lot of the realities that we're talking about now are ongoing and always changing, always nuanced. But one of the things that has really boosted my confidence is the fact that the previous administration actually put in the work. Persons like even Dr. Dale Crawford, I've seen some of the minutes from the meeting that they actually put in the work. We had some of the best consultants on the globe working on our legislature, 2019, 2020, 2021. So me seeing those files has allowed me to understand that it wasn't a unilateral decision or a decision based on profit alone, that even the advice of my commission or the commission that I sat on came into consideration. The advice of the commission across the Caribbean, the CARICOM, all the CARICOM heads that came together, that spoke about revitalizing Rastafari and making sure that they're a part of this, making sure that they're first in the line and receive the biggest part because they've been in the vanguard. Everyone made those same advice for us.
Brother Agard, 30 seconds. We're right up on time, but I want to ask. I think I'm going to ask you to give your closing remarks with a question. The role of Rastafarian. the role of Rasta in this re-education process, because Dr. Garfield is saying that the work has been done, but then you still hear the fear of individuals like Dr. Woodley and myself, because I think we have to inherit this. I think any medical doctor should have a level of concern, because I have seen the intoxication, and I can tell you that there's reasonable concern here. What is the role of Rasta you have a long-standing history with the plant?
Well, I would say that one of the things is that the elders definitely would give advice as to how to use the herb, how not to use the herb. Like, for instance, I think there was a mention of mixing the herb with things and what's not. And the elders basically warn against those things. So, a lot of people do their own little experiments and what's not. And you can't stop that, because just like a man would take some Viagra and mix it with a Guinness, I mean, how do you control these things? But from Rasta view, is to just deal with things as natural as possible and to just keep it straight according to how the scripture rolled it out. I think that one of the main issue for the fear is because, one, Rasta has always been looked upon as like some kind of second-class citizen. And since Rasta using this thing, it's like, to me, sometimes society like afraid to say, well, the Rasta man, them were right. So, and that seemed to be a thing not only with the marijuana, but even as I am sitting and I could reason scriptures and so on. I was on one of those commissions too, and we sat with the Christian Council and Evangelical Association, and they knew nothing about the cannabis being in the Bible. So Rasta bring it up and show them where it is, and you find, so one of the things is, if doctors show fear, the people gonna show fear. So I think that between the doctors and the pastors them in the churches, they could bring this fear down to minimal. All they have to do is educate themselves about this thing. I mean, we're at Gideon Farm. If you all want to come reason with us anytime, we just give us a call and come and let's talk about this thing. So that fear don't need to be there. I think that Rasta can't bring it down, because Rasta has already been looked upon in a certain way. But I think that the doctors, the pastors of churches and so on, they're the ones the people checking for. So they're the ones who have to have that education first, and then disseminate to the general population. And I think that fear would just disappear.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sticking with us, giving us 2 extra minutes of your time. Thank you for joining us and being part of this very important conversation that, as you can see, often generates a lot of heat and impassioned speeches. But rarely sufficient nuance to account for its complexity, as I mentioned. I think that underscores the fact that cannabis simply cannot be reduced to a simplistic caricature, and any one slogan, I think, does not justify the complexity and the use and the myriad use and properties that the plant has. More to come. Certainly, this is the start of a very important debate that we need to have around our dinner tables, around our homes, in our communities, with our patients, with your doctors. Thank you so much for tonight. Stay safe, and of course, reach out to us, reach out to any one of us if you have any questions. Gideon Farms and the CEO of the marijuana authority here on St. Kitts. All the best. Good night. I think, right?